The morning I discovered the HOA letter taped to my front door, I was already running late for work, coffee in hand, and ice coating every surface of my driveway like a skating rink. The paper fluttered in the bitter February wind that whipped through our Boulder, Colorado neighborhood, and I knew before even reading it that my day was about to get worse. I am Ryan Vaughn, and I have owned my home in the Pinecrest Heights subdivision for 8 years. It is a beautiful property with a gorgeous view of the Flatirons. And until 6 months ago, when the new HOA board took over, it had been a peaceful place to live. The letter informed me, in bolded red text no less, that my roof heating cables violated Section 7.4 of the updated community guidelines regarding visual aesthetics and unauthorized exterior modifications. The cables had been there since before the new board. I installed them 3 winters ago after a massive ice dam formed on my north-facing roof, causing water to seep into my attic and destroy about $5,000 worth of insulation and drywall. My insurance covered most of it, but the experience taught me that prevention was cheaper than repair. The heating cables, thin black wires that zigzagged along my roof edge, melted snow and ice before dams could form. They were practically invisible from street level and had saved me countless headaches. I crumpled the letter and shoved it in my pocket, then carefully made my way down my icy driveway. My neighbor, Tom Peterson, was out salting his walkway and gave me a sympathetic wave. "Got one too?" He called out, "Yeah, you." "Yep, apparently my garden gnomes are now considered lawn clutter." He shook his head. "That new board president is something else." That would be Patricia Hendricks, a 52-year-old real estate agent who had moved into the neighborhood 18 months ago and immediately set about improving everything. She had perfectly highlighted blonde hair that never moved in the wind, wore pantsuits even to check her mailbox, and spoke to everyone like they were difficult children. The other board members were essentially her puppets, nodding along to whatever she decreed. I made it to work at the architecture firm where I had been employed for the past decade, but the letter nagged at me all day. During lunch, I pulled out my copy of the original HOA covenants, the ones I had signed when purchasing the house. There was nothing in there about heating cables. Nothing at all. The updated guidelines Patricia referenced had been pushed through during a meeting I had missed because I was visiting my sister in Portland. Only 17 homeowners out of the subdivision's 143 had attended that meeting, and most of them were Patricia's immediate neighbors, who seemed terrified of crossing her. After work, I drove home as the sun set behind the mountains, casting everything in shades of orange and purple. Another storm was rolling in. The weather report predicted 6 to 8 inches of heavy, wet snow overnight. Perfect ice dam weather. My heating cables would normally kick on automatically once temperatures dropped below freezing and precipitation started, but that evening I faced a choice. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, engine running, heat blasting. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Patricia Hendricks herself. "Dear Mr. Vaughn, this is your formal notice that failure to remove the unauthorized heating cables from your roof within 72 hours will result in daily fines of $100. The HOA board takes visual uniformity seriously as it maintains property values for all residents. Please acknowledge receipt of this notice. Regards, Patricia Hendricks, HOA President." I read it 3 times. $100 per day. That was aggressive even for an HOA. I got out of my car and looked up at my roof. The cables were barely visible, thin lines against the dark shingles. From the street, you would need binoculars to spot them. This was not about aesthetics. This was about control. I went inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. There was a provision for appealing board decisions, but it required filing a formal complaint and waiting for the next quarterly meeting, which was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of daily $100 fines would be over $4,000. Even if I won the appeal, the bylaws did not guarantee the fines would be refunded. The snow started falling around 8 that evening, thick flakes that accumulated fast. I stood at my window with a beer, watching it pile up. My heating cables sat dormant. I had unplugged them. The thing about ice dams is that they form when heat from inside your house warms the roof, melting the snow. The water runs down toward the gutters, but the edge of the roof is colder because it extends past the house's heated envelope. The water refreezes there, creating a dam. More water backs up behind it, and eventually it finds its way under your shingles and into your house. Or if conditions are right, it drips off the edge in a steady stream. My house sat on a slight hill. Below my roof edge, about 15 feet down, was the guest parking area where HOA board members always parked during their meetings. Patricia had claimed one of these spots as her personal space, even though the parking was supposed to be first come, first served. Her silver Lexus SUV sat there most days, gleaming and perfect. I did not plan what happened next, not exactly. I just chose not to reinstall my heating cables. That was my right, was it not? The HOA banned them, so I was complying. What happened naturally on my roof was not my fault. The snow continued through the night and into the next morning. I woke to 10 inches of accumulation, more than the forecast predicted. The sun came out around 9, bright and warm despite the freezing air temperature. Perfect ice dam conditions. By noon, I could see the water starting to run down my roof. By 2, it was refreezing at the edge, creating that telltale ridge of ice. By 4, water was dripping steadily off the dam, falling in a steady patter onto the parking area below. Patricia's Lexus was not there yet. Board meetings were every other Thursday at 7, and it was Thursday. I made popcorn and waited. She arrived at 6:45, pulling into her usual spot directly below the section of my roof where the ice dam was doing its work. The dripping had intensified as the afternoon warmth peaked, even though the sun was setting. The temperature was hovering right around 32 degrees, that perfect point where things melted and froze in endless cycle. I watched from my window as Patricia got out of her car, clutching a leather portfolio. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and heels, completely inappropriate for the icy conditions. The other board members arrived soon after. Gary Simmons, a retired accountant who never spoke, Deborah Cole, a nervous woman who apologized constantly, and Martin Hughes, who worked from home and seemed to attend meetings out of boredom rather than interest. They gathered near the community clubhouse entrance, which was just at the edge of the parking area. The dripping from my roof was not loud, just a steady plop, plop, plop onto the pavement near Patricia's car. I could see water pooling on her hood, running down her windshield. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I know because I watched the entire time, fascinated by what was unfolding. As the temperature dropped with the setting sun, the water dripping from my ice dam began to freeze where it landed. A sheet of ice formed across the parking area. More water continued to drip onto Patricia's Lexus, coating it in a thickening layer of ice. When they finally emerged from the clubhouse at 9, full darkness had fallen. Patricia was talking animatedly, probably about some new rule to implement. She did not notice the ice sheet on the pavement until her heel hit it. Her arms windmilled, the portfolio went flying, and she landed hard on her backside. I should not have laughed, but I did. Just a little. Gary helped her up while Deborah fussed and apologized as if she had personally iced the parking lot. Patricia brushed them off, clearly embarrassed and angry. Then she saw her car. The Lexus looked like it had been caught in a freezing rainstorm. Ice coated the hood, the windshield, the roof. Icicles hung from the side mirrors. The driver's side door handle was encased in ice. I could hear her voice from my window, shrill and furious, though I could not make out the words. She looked up, scanning the buildings. Her gaze landed on my house, specifically my roof, where the ice dam was clearly visible even in the parking lot lights. Our eyes met across the distance. Even from that far, I could feel the fury. I waved. The next morning, I had another letter. This one was delivered by hand, shoved into my door frame hard enough to bend the paper. Mr. Vaughn, your negligence has resulted in property damage and personal injury. This is unacceptable. You will be held financially responsible for all damages to HOA property and personal vehicles. Additionally, your fines have been increased to $250 per day until the issue with your roof is resolved. Patricia Hendricks, HOA President. Negligence. I had complied with their demands. They banned heating cables, so I removed them. The ice dam was a natural consequence of Colorado winter weather. If anything, they were responsible for creating the situation by banning the preventative measure. I called a lawyer that morning. His name was Steve Morrison, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, a small practice above a coffee shop. I explained the situation, showed him the letters and the updated guidelines Patricia had pushed through. Steve leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He was in his early 50s with graying hair and the kind of face that had seen too many petty disputes. "Did you sign acknowledgement of the updated guidelines?" he asked. "No. I was not at the meeting where they were introduced, and I never received formal notice until after they were already in effect. And the heating cables were installed before the new guidelines, 3 years before. They were never an issue until Patricia took over." Steve nodded slowly. "Here is the thing. HOAs have a lot of power, but they are not above the law. They cannot retroactively enforce rules on existing installations without proper notice and a reasonable grace period. They also cannot fine you for not fixing something that only exists because of their rules. So what do? First, document everything. Photos, videos, copies of all correspondence. Second, send a formal response to the HOA board, copying all members, stating that you dispute the fines and will not be paying them. Third, request a hearing before the full board, which is your right under Colorado HOA law. And fourth, keep doing exactly what you are doing. Do not let them bully you." I left his office feeling better. I spent that afternoon documenting everything. Photos of my ice dam, the parking area, Patricia's car covered in ice. I found the original HOA covenants and compared them line by line with Patricia's updated guidelines. She had added 17 new rules, most of them cosmetic nitpicks about paint colors, lawn ornaments, and exterior modifications. That evening, I drafted my formal response. I kept it professional and factual, outlining why I believed the fines were unjust and requesting a hearing. I sent it via email and certified mail to all 4 board members. Patricia responded within an hour. "Your request for a hearing is noted. However, fines will continue to accrue until the issue is resolved. You are in violation of community standards." The ice dam was getting worse. We had another snowstorm the following week, dumping 12 inches. My entire roof edge was now a solid ridge of ice. The dripping had become more like a small waterfall, and the parking area below was essentially an ice rink. The HOA put up caution cones and salt, but with the continuous dripping, it did not help much. Other board members had stopped parking there. Only Patricia persisted, moving her car to the far edge of the lot, but still within range of the dripping. I think it was a pride thing. She was not going to let me dictate where she parked. Tom Peterson came by one evening with a six-pack. "You are becoming a neighborhood legend," he said, settling into my couch. "Everyone is talking about it. Half the people think you are a genius. The other half think Patricia is going to have you arrested. She cannot arrest me for having an ice dam. No, but she can make your life miserable. You know, she sent letters to 11 other homeowners about various violations. She is on a rampage." I learned later that Patricia had started documenting everything too. She had photos of my ice dam, measurements of the icicles, temperature logs showing when the dripping occurred. She was building a case, though for what, I was not sure. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after my request, which was within the required time frame but felt like an eternity. In the meantime, the fines allegedly accumulated. By my count, Patricia claimed I owed over $5,000. I had not paid a cent. During those 3 weeks, strange things started happening. Someone left a citation on my door about my trash cans being visible from the street, even though I had placed them exactly where I always did on collection day. I got a letter about my lawn not being maintained, despite the fact that it was February and everything was covered in snow. Another letter complained about my doormat being the wrong color. Patricia was escalating, trying to bury me in violations, but she made a mistake. Each petty letter, each ridiculous fine made her look more unreasonable. And I documented everything. The night before the hearing, another major storm hit. This one was a blizzard, with wind-driven snow and temperatures dropping into the single digits. My ice dam, which had partially melted during a brief warm spell, reformed with a vengeance. By morning, it was massive, at least 8 inches thick and extending 4 feet up my roof. The icicles hanging from my gutters were 2 feet long, thick as my arm. The hearing was held in the clubhouse, the same building where the board meetings occurred. 27 homeowners showed up, which was a record. Word had spread about the dispute and people were interested. Some supported me, tired of Patricia's increasingly authoritarian rule. Others were worried about property values and disorder. Patricia sat at the head of a folding table, with Gary, Deborah, and Martin on either side. She had printed materials, charts, photos. She was prepared. I had Steve Morrison beside me and my own folder of documentation. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice crisp and businesslike. "We are here to address the ongoing violation by Mr. Ryan Vaughn regarding unauthorized roof modifications and the resulting damage to community property. Mr. Vaughn, you have requested this hearing to dispute the fines and penalties assessed by the board. You may make your statement." I stood up. Public speaking was not my favorite thing, but I had practiced. "Thank you. I want to start by stating clearly that I have not violated any rules. The heating cables in question were installed 3 years ago, long before the current board implemented new guidelines. I received no formal notice of these guidelines until after they were already being enforced. According to Colorado HOA law, you cannot retroactively enforce rules without proper notice and a reasonable grace period. Furthermore, the ice dam on my roof exists specifically because I complied with your directive to remove my heating cables. You cannot fine me for a problem that your own rules created. Patricia's expression did not change. The guidelines were properly implemented at a board meeting with homeowner attendance. Anyone who did not attend was notified via community newsletter. I never received a newsletter. That is not our responsibility. We made them available. Steve Morrison stood. Actually, it is your responsibility. Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 38, Article 33.3, requires HOAs to provide written notice of rule changes to all homeowners via certified mail or personal delivery. A newsletter does not meet that standard. Patricia's jaw tightened. We followed proper procedure. You have proof of certified mailing to all homeowners. Silence. I thought not, Steve continued. Furthermore, my client's heating cables were a safety device designed to prevent the exact situation that is now occurring. By forcing their removal, the board has created a hazard that endangers residents and damages property. The board, not my client, is liable for any damages. Gary, the retired accountant, leaned forward, but the dripping from his roof has damaged the parking area and multiple vehicles. That is a cost to the HOA. A cost created by the board's decision, Steve replied. If my client were allowed to reinstall his heating cables, the problem would cease immediately. Instead, the board is insisting he pay fines while simultaneously prohibiting the solution. Deborah, the nervous one, spoke up. Could we not just grant an exception for the heating cables? I mean, they do serve a purpose. Patricia cut her off. That would set a precedent. If we allow one exception, everyone will want exceptions. Rules exist for a reason. What reason? I asked. The cables were barely visible. They served a legitimate safety function. What community interest is served by banning them? Aesthetic uniformity, Patricia said. Property values are maintained when all homes meet the same visual standards. You have any evidence that my heating cables affected property values? Any complaints from homeowners before you became board president? More silence. Tom Peterson, sitting in the audience, raised his hand. I would like to say something. I have lived here for 12 years. Ryan's heating cables never bothered anyone. But since Patricia became board president, I have received 4 violation notices about things that were never problems before. My garden gnomes, my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, my holiday lights staying up 2 days past January 1st. This is not about property values. This is about control. Several people nodded. A woman in the back spoke up. I got fined for having a wreath on my door in March. A wreath. This has gotten ridiculous. Patricia stood, her face flushed. This hearing is about Mr. Vaughn's violation, not about general board policy. If you have complaints, you can file them separately. Now, we need to vote on whether to uphold the fines. Point of order, Steve Morrison said. According to your own bylaws, any fine over $1,000 requires a vote of the full homeowner association, not just the board. Mr. Vaughn's alleged fines exceed $6,000 now. This hearing is inadequate. You need to call a special meeting of all homeowners. Patricia looked like she had swallowed a lemon. That is not necessary. The bylaws give the board authority to assess fines. Up to $1,000, Steve repeated. After that, it requires association approval. Would you like me to cite the specific section? Martin Hughes, who had been silent until now, flipped through a copy of the bylaws. He is right. Section 12.3. Fines exceeding $1,000 require majority homeowner approval. Patricia sat down hard. The meeting devolved into argument. Several homeowners demanded Patricia step down. Others defended her, saying the neighborhood needed strong leadership. It was chaos, and I sat in the middle of it, feeling weirdly calm. Eventually, Patricia called for order and announced that the board would table the decision pending further review. The hearing ended with nothing resolved, but I felt like I had won something. Walking out, several neighbors patted me on the back or shook my hand. Tom was grinning. You should run for board president, he said. No thanks. I just want to be left alone. But Patricia was not done. 2 days after the hearing, I received a letter from a law firm in Denver. She had retained attorneys to pursue the fines. The letter was full of legal language, but the gist was clear: pay up or face a lawsuit. Steve Morrison was unimpressed when I forwarded it to him. Let them sue, he said. We have a stronger case than they do. Plus, most of the homeowners seem to be on your side. Even if they win in court, they will have spent HOA funds on legal fees for a petty dispute. That will not look good when board elections come up. Board elections. I had not thought about that. They were scheduled for May, 3 months away. Patricia had another year on her term, but Gary and Martin were both up for re-election. I started getting phone calls from neighbors asking if I would consider running for the board. I kept saying no, but the idea took root. The best way to fix the HOA was from the inside. Meanwhile, winter was turning toward spring, but slowly. We had another storm in mid-March, 8 inches of wet snow. My ice dam, which had started to melt, rebuilt itself overnight. The parking area below was a disaster zone again, and the HOA had to hire someone to chip away the ice, costing them hundreds of dollars. Patricia's lawsuit moved forward. We had a court date scheduled for late April. In the meantime, she filed for a temporary injunction requiring me to either fix the ice dam or cover the costs of continuous ice removal in the parking area. The judge denied the injunction, noting that the HOA had created the situation by banning the preventative measure. That was my first real legal victory, and it felt good. The local news picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between a homeowner and an overzealous HOA. A reporter came to interview me, filming the ice dam and the parking area below. Patricia refused to comment, but they got footage of her glaring at the camera. The story aired on a slow news day and got more attention than expected. Suddenly, I was the ice dam guy. People recognized me at the grocery store. I got supportive emails from strangers. A few contractors offered to install heating cables for free, but I declined. The point now was not about fixing my roof. It was about the principle. April arrived, bringing warmer temperatures and finally melting the ice dam. My roof returned to normal, which was almost disappointing. The dripping stopped, the parking area dried out, and things seemed to calm down. But the lawsuit was still pending. In the weeks before the court date, Steve Morrison and I prepared extensively. We had documentation, witness statements from neighbors, expert testimony from a roofing contractor about the necessity of heating cables in preventing ice dams, and a structural engineer who explained how banning safety devices created liability for the HOA. Patricia had her own experts, mostly focused on aesthetic concerns and property values. Her entire case rested on the idea that the HOA had the right to enforce uniform standards and that I had violated those standards. The hearing took place on April 22nd at the Boulder County Courthouse. It was a small courtroom, not like the dramatic ones on TV. Judge Raymond Ortega presided, a no-nonsense man in his 60s who seemed annoyed that his court time was being used for an HOA dispute. Patricia's lawyer went first, laying out the case for the HOA's authority and my alleged violations. He presented photos of my heating cables, argued they were unsightly, cited the updated guidelines, and claimed my refusal to comply had cost the HOA thousands of dollars in ice removal and damaged property. Then it was our turn. Steve Morrison was methodical, walking the judge through the timeline. He showed that the heating cables predated the new guidelines, that I had never received proper notice of the rule change, that the guidelines themselves were improperly implemented without required homeowner notification, and that the HOA had created the ice dam problem by banning the preventative measure. The roofing contractor explained how ice dams formed and why heating cables were essential for homes with my roof orientation. The structural engineer testified that the HOA could be held liable if someone was injured due to ice in the parking area, especially since they had banned the device that prevented the ice formation. Several neighbors testified on my behalf, describing Patricia's increasingly authoritarian management and the barrage of petty violations she had issued. Tom Peterson was particularly effective, bringing photos of his garden gnomes and asking the judge if they truly constituted a threat to property values. Patricia testified as well, defending her actions as necessary for community standards. She was poised and confident, but I could see the judge was not buying it. He asked pointed questions about the notification process for the new guidelines, about the reasonableness of fining someone for a problem the HOA created, about the cost-benefit analysis of pursuing this lawsuit. By the time closing arguments wrapped up, I felt cautiously optimistic. But judges are unpredictable, and I prepared myself for either outcome. Judge Ortega took a brief recess, then returned with his decision. He did not drag it out. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, this court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Vaughn. The HOA's updated guidelines were not properly implemented according to Colorado statute, which requires written notice to all homeowners. Furthermore, the HOA cannot assess fines for a condition that exists because of their own rules. Mr. Vaughn's heating cables were a reasonable safety measure, and banning them created the ice dam problem. The HOA is ordered to immediately cease all fines and penalties against Mr. Vaughn, to reimburse any legal fees he has incurred, and to revise their notification procedures to comply with state law. Additionally, Mr. Vaughn is granted an explicit exception to reinstall his heating cables. This court strongly suggests the HOA board reconsider their priorities and focus on legitimate community concerns rather than petty aesthetic disputes. The gavel came down, and it was over. I had won. Patricia's face was stone, but I saw Gary and Deborah exchange relieved glances. They had never wanted this fight. As we left the courtroom, several neighbors who had attended applauded. Patricia stalked out without a word. The story made the local news again, this time with the headline "Homeowner Defeats HOA in Ice Dam Dispute." The article was picked up by a few national outlets that covered HOA stories, and I got emails from people across the country sharing their own HOA nightmares. But the real victory came in May, during the board elections. Gary chose not to run for re-election, tired of the drama. Martin ran but was defeated. 2 new board members were elected, both homeowners who had supported me during the dispute. They immediately began working to roll back Patricia's more ridiculous rules. Patricia remained board president, but she was now outnumbered. At the first board meeting after the election, the new members voted to rescind most of the updated guidelines, returning to the original, more reasonable covenants. Heating cables were explicitly allowed. Garden gnomes were fine. Wreaths could stay up as long as people wanted. Patricia tried to fight it, but she had no power anymore. By July, she announced her resignation from the board, citing personal reasons. She moved out of the neighborhood 2 months later, selling her house and disappearing from our lives as quickly as she had entered them. I never did run for the board myself, despite continued requests. I had made my point and won my battle. The new board functioned well without me, focused on actual community maintenance like road repair and snow removal, rather than enforcing arbitrary aesthetic standards. My heating cables were reinstalled that fall, just in time for winter. When the first snow came in November, they hummed to life, melting the accumulation and preventing any ice dams. The parking area below remained clear and safe. Life returned to normal. On a cold evening in December, I was sitting in my living room when there was a knock on my door. It was Tom Peterson, holding a wrapped gift. "What is this?" I asked. "From the neighborhood." "Well, from those of us who appreciate what you did." I unwrapped it. Inside was a plaque that read, "To Ryan Vaughn, who stood up for common sense. The Pinecrest Heights Neighborhood 2025. I laughed. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe, but you earned it. You took on the HOA and won. Do you know how rare that is?" I invited him in for a beer, and we sat watching the snow fall, my heating cables doing their job. No ice forming, no dripping water, no drama. Just a quiet Colorado evening. The fight had been exhausting, frustrating, and expensive, even with the reimbursement. But it had been worth it. Not just for my heating cables, but for proving that homeowners did not have to accept arbitrary rules from petty tyrants. HOAs serve a purpose, maintaining common areas and protecting property values, but they are not meant to micromanage every aspect of homeowner life. In the end, Patricia's downfall was her own arrogance. She believed that rules mattered more than reasonableness, that control mattered more than community. She picked a fight over something trivial and lost everything. The neighborhood was better for her departure, friendlier and more relaxed. As for me, I just wanted to keep my house maintained and my roof free of ice dams. Mission accomplished. The legal precedent from my case actually helped several other homeowners in Colorado facing similar HOA disputes. Steve Morrison told me he had been contacted by 3 different people, citing Judge Ortega's decision in their own battles. It felt good to know that my stubbornness had created something useful beyond my own situation. That winter was harsh, with multiple blizzards and record snowfall. My heating cables worked perfectly, never allowing ice to accumulate. Other houses in the neighborhood were not so lucky. Several had significant ice dams, and a couple experienced water damage. A few homeowners installed their own heating cables, and the HOA board approved every request without hesitation. There were discussions at board meetings about proactively recommending heating cables for certain roof orientations, turning what Patricia had banned into something the HOA actually endorsed. I found that deeply satisfying. In February, a year after the original letter had been taped to my door, I stood at my window watching snow fall and thinking about how much had changed. The parking area below my roof was clear and dry, salt-treated and well-maintained by the HOA. No ice, no drama, no angry board president glaring up at my roof. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the new board president, a retired teacher named Helen Foster who actually cared about the community. She was asking if I would be willing to serve on a committee reviewing the HOA covenants to identify other outdated or overly restrictive rules. I thought about declining, but then I remembered Judge Ortega's words about focusing on legitimate community concerns. I replied yes. The committee work was surprisingly enjoyable. We met once a month, going through the covenants line by line, discussing what made sense and what did not. We eliminated rules about paint colors, allowed for more flexibility in landscaping, and removed vague language about aesthetic uniformity that could be interpreted any way a board president wanted. We also added specific protections for safety devices like heating cables, security cameras, and solar panels. The goal was to create rules that maintained property values without being oppressive. It took 6 months, but we eventually presented a revised set of covenants to the homeowner association. The vote was held in September at a special meeting. Over 90 homeowners attended, the largest turnout in the neighborhood's history. The revised covenants passed with 87% approval. It felt like a final victory, not just over Patricia's authoritarian impulse, but over the whole mentality that HOAs exist to control rather than serve. Tom Peterson joked that I should write a book about the experience. I laughed it off, but honestly, there was something to be said for documenting what happened. Not because my story was unique, but because it was so common. Across America, homeowners were dealing with similar issues, facing HOAs that had lost sight of their purpose. The ice dam battle had taught me several things. First, documentation was everything. Without photos, emails, and witnesses, I would have had no case. Second, legal protections existed, but you had to know where to find them and be willing to use them. Third, community mattered. The support from neighbors had been crucial, both emotionally and practically. And finally, I learned that sometimes you had to stand up for principles even when it was easier to comply. If I had just paid the fines and removed my heating cables, Patricia would have continued her crusade unchecked. Other homeowners would have faced similar harassment. By fighting back, I had helped create change that benefited everyone. The story could have ended there, with revised covenants and a peaceful neighborhood. But there was one more chapter. In November, I received a letter forwarded from Steve Morrison's office. It was from Patricia Hendricks, or rather, from her attorney. She was suing me for defamation, claiming that my statements to the media and in court had damaged her reputation and caused emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. Steve read the letter and actually laughed. "This is absurd," he said. "Everything you said was true and documented. You cannot defame someone by accurately describing their actions." Plus, given that she was a public figure in the context of the HOA, the legal standard is even higher. She would need to prove actual malice. She has no case. So what do? We file a motion to dismiss, which the court will almost certainly grant. And then, if we are feeling motivated, we can countersue for frivolous litigation and harassment. The motion to dismiss was filed in December. The judge granted it in January without even requiring a hearing. Patricia's attorney, apparently realizing how weak the case was, did not appeal. We did not countersue, deciding it was not worth the energy. That was truly the end of Patricia's involvement in my life. I never heard from her again, never saw her around Boulder, never had another interaction. She had moved on, hopefully learning something from the experience, though I doubted it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My house remained well maintained, my roof stayed free of ice dams, and the neighborhood functioned peacefully under reasonable HOA management. I continued serving on the Covenants Committee, helping to fine-tune rules as issues arose. In March, 2 years after the initial conflict, I was contacted by a journalist writing a book about HOA disputes in America. She wanted to interview me for a chapter about homeowners who fought back successfully. I agreed, and we spent an afternoon discussing everything that had happened. The book was published that fall and became a minor bestseller in a niche market of people dealing with HOA problems. My story was one of several, but the journalist told me it resonated because it showed how a small act of resistance could create meaningful change. I never set out to be an HOA reform advocate. I just wanted to protect my house from ice dams. But sometimes principles matter more than convenience, and sometimes standing up to petty tyranny is the right thing to do, even when it is difficult. As I sit here now, looking out at another Colorado winter, snow falling gently on a landscape I have come to love even more through this struggle, I feel satisfied. My heating cables are humming along, doing their job, keeping my roof safe. The parking area below is clear. The neighborhood is peaceful. And somewhere, hopefully far away, Patricia Hendricks is learning that you cannot control everything, no matter how hard you try. The ice dam dripped on their cars and justice prevailed. That is all anyone can ask for.